Hello, and I am going to see if I get this word right. Tovarishis. That's the Russian word for comrade. And it's a much softer and more friendly sounding word. You can see the relation to words that are friendly for like family members like babushka and stuff. Than comrade, which is a much harder consonant sound. And of course, that's why it's constantly used in anti-socialist propaganda about the Soviet Union and the US. I'm here with another episode of my Crisis in the Kremlin Let's Play. I hope you folks are, well, taking care of each other and being kind to yourselves. I have lost again, and again, and again at this. So I clearly need to try something new. Excuse me. If you take Brezhnev type, you're limited in your foreign policy options, so I will do this. I believe you need to a custom leader to be able to take loans in the West, or at least start with coexistence foreign policy instead of the Brezhnev doctrine, which is more aggressive. I wonder... do friendship, but then it sticks you with, coexistence. There we go. I'm gonna try and do better this time. I've been thinking about the way the budget works in this game. It seems that it shrivels up to some degree if you cut expenditures, although that could just be that my previous game where I made drastic budget cuts, I didn't do the labor minimum reform, so you start with a much weaker economy at the beginning, but it doesn't, your tax revenue doesn't recalculate until a little bit in, so it thinks that you're at a balanced budget because the expenditures seem to be fixed and not change based on whether you do labor reforms, except for the imports of foreign goods. So, could just be that. I don't know how I'm going to survive this, but I'm going to try something a little different. Probably need some loans in the West. I probably don't want to... Excuse me. Immediately do a revolution in Argentina, because I think that raising DEFCON prevents me from getting loans. Like, right now, I could take out loans. Reserves are set to 700. This is actually based on the game start stuff. Let's do this now. We'll have to come back to it later. Pretty sure full reserves will be affected by choices and events, though. A lot of full reserves, for sure. Apparently, though, if you run a real large deficit, you can get an event where you can withdraw money from the reserves, a lot of money, which can actually let you increase expenditures to dig yourself out. So that's how you mobilize reserves. I wondered how you could actually do large deficit spending, and now I know. Last time, I think things are going okay, but I didn't respond to SDI, and that led to an army coup, so you definitely have to respond. In fact, maybe I'll announce plans to do my own version, because I think later that gives you a follow-on event where you can actually do the military space program in parallel to the civilian one. I don't think it locks you out of it. So, learning, and hopefully I'm right about some of this. First event, GDR. Massive unrest in the GDR due to a food crisis, over-industrialization, and the desire among the Soviet leadership to unite Germany as a democratic neutral state. The situation is aggravated by the actions of the American Special Services, saboteurs use agent machines, and the West German authorities transfer of, quote, peaceful protesters from West Berlin to East. You folks should be aware the West German authorities, even more so than the East German authorities, which did this as well, but, you know, lesser of two evils in the Cold War was definitely the Eastern Bloc, despite the propaganda on the contrary. That said, the East German authorities were particularly vicious and oppressive, even more so than the Soviet ones. But But the West German authorities, even more so in the East, turned a blind eye to a lot of fascists continuing on in the government, keeping a lot of judges who had been appointed by the Nazis in power, for instance, and rules that restricted the formation of socialist parties, like actual communist, Marxist, democratic socialist parties, those kind of parties, instead of Nazism, which falsely claimed to be socialist, but was nothing but a lie. Similar to Pol Pot's supposed national communism, which was actually fascism, with racial superiority ingrained in it and such. And Pol Pot assassinated his way to leadership of the Communist Party in Cambodia, and then renamed the party and changed its doctrine. And yeah, he was not a socialist, really. Anyways, the crowd seized the SED Central Committee building, the government house, the Red Banner was stormed from the Brandenburg Gate, the Customs Service building was smashed and burned down. After a fierce assault at the National Front headquarters, the Central Council of Trade Unions and the House of the Soviet German Friendship Society were captured. So, Ulbricht, though, who was in charge of East Germany, he was like a Stalinist, very oppressive, worse than Stalin, arguably, in terms of oppression of political dissent. He was not very popular. The guy who should have been in charge of East Germany was Ernst Thälmann, who was actually very popular among the German left, had a lot of support, leaned towards anarchism, so he wasn't particularly friendly with the Soviets, but he was murdered by the Nazis shortly before they lost World War II. They tried to make it look like he died in an air raid, and officially can't be conclusively proven, but except I think there was a testimony of somebody, but basically it's believed that the Nazis went out and basically shot him during an air raid near the end of World War II when they were losing and Soviets were marching in, and then they tried to claim that it was done by the Allies, but it was actually they left the body out or something during the air raid, but it was actually the Nazis murdered Thälmann because he was very popular with the masses. But Ulbricht was very harsh and not the right person to be leading East Germany. You ever watch My Heart's Iron 4 Let's Play? I do, actually. Done a couple German socialist runs where I have Thälmann become leader of the country, overthrow the Nazis. Anyways, could use army control protests. Let's see what happens if I support transfer power to moderates, though. On June 20th, under pressure from the Soviet leadership, the first secretary of the SED Central Committee, Walter Ulbricht, resigned. He was the wrong leader after all. He was replaced by the former Social Democrat Otto Bertwall. Oh yeah, he was a Social Democrat. Alright, the relationship between Social Democrats and Marxists is complicated in German history. The Social Democratic Party of Germany originally claimed to be Marxist and to be essentially democratic socialist. That is, socialism and eventually communism via reformist means, so slowly phasing out capitalism, worker-controlled means of production, actual socialism, not social democracy, Nordic model, tamed capitalism nonsense. Over time, they abandoned that doctrine, swapped to a policy that was essentially social democracy. This relates to the fall of the Second and the Third Internationals, with what was happening in Germany actually lying at the core of why the Second and Third Internationals shared. The second was more to do with World War I. But the third was more about what happened in Germany with SDP, the SPD, the Social Democratic Party of Germany. There was a split in the party, with some of the more left-wing members going on to join the KPD, the Communist Party of Germany, because of the split. And the SPD sided with Nazi militias, pre-Nazi militias, because they weren't Nazi Party informed yet, but they were people who'd later form the core of it, and murdered many of the left-wing people who'd either left their party or had never joined it, including, among people who never joined it, Rosa Luxemburg and, what was his name? Another famous professor. These are both academics, professors who taught universities and wrote books that were Marxists. And they were taken out in the night and basically shot in the back of the head by fascist militias with the approval and funding of the Social Democrats. So this was a betrayal of socialism, obviously. Rosa Luxemburg was a brilliant academic who was a fierce critic of Lenin in many ways, actually, and could have led Germany on a path that was not Leninist, or at least not that her views were similar enough to Lenin, but really not Leninist, that was not Leninist but was still Marxist and might have prevented the Nazis from taking power. The SPD horribly betrayed socialism, horribly betrayed the working class, cutting into welfare budgets when things got tight. This feeling of betrayal is part of what allowed the Nazis to take over in Germany in the first place, because many of the working class in Germany felt correctly betrayed by the Social Democrats. Anyways, the vast majority of his associates, Obrecht resigned. He was replaced with former Social Democrat Otto Bergwall, who really was just more of a, capitalism tamed, placed many of his associates to governing bodies. The vast majority of demonstrators did not have the goal of overthrowing the ruling regime of the SED, although some were Nazis, as you see if you take the army crackdown stance, where someone will sing Hitler's anthem, literally, and the Soviet military administration. They put forward purely economic demands for lower prices and proper working standards, which were satisfied by the new party leadership. A few days later, at many enterprises, the SED was able to quickly organize an armed guard, which is called the Combat Groups of the Working Class. Well, that sounds Marxist. Although there was the, what was it called, the Iron Front of the Social Democrats, who historically fought against the Nazis in street violence before they took over. With help from the communists, actually. There was a left wing of the Social Democrats who didn't go so quietly into the night, even as the leadership of the Social Democratic Party betrayed ordinary people. But the rank and file, some of them were much more radical. Anyways, they suppressed the resistance of those who refused the peace and restored order. A mass rally of young people in support of socialist rule was held in Berlin June 24th, and on June 25th, the Democratic Bloc of political parties and law enforcement officers expressed their support of the new GDR government, which announced the decentralization of the economy, participation in labor cooperatives and joint plans, and ending forced industrialization. So, cool. More role for workers' cooperatives, less centralized, more participatory. Still socialism. There are certain advantages to planned economies more centrally, but honestly, it wasn't really technologically viable until information technology, which is represented in this game. You have to go heavy in the information technology branch for a centralized economy to work well. Had rid the forced industrialization thing with more mass participation than planning. Hungary. Alright, so this is Nagy, who unleashes fascist militias hunting down and killing socialists throughout the country. Communist and Soviet sympathizers began to kill en masse. This guy's a real snake. Transfer power to moderates again. Situation under control. Nagy is originally allowed to participate to continue in the government here, but then he Kedar opposed, but Kedar was the leader of the government, and he opposed withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact. Nagy declared him a traitor, started a civil war, lost the civil war. Nagy was executed. So Nagy, who was a snake, still gets executed this way, but he reveals his true colors more by starting a civil war in his country. History, I didn't see God. This is Yuri Gagarin. Should not violate the freedom of conscience. Greater freedom of religion. Czechoslovakia. You can actually turn a blind eye and let them actually go full on restoration of capitalism, and become a neutral country. But that's going a little far. Limit reforms with threats. This will lead to socialist as opposed to communist leadership. So maybe it's social democracy that still proclaims wanting to achieve social reformist means, or maybe it's just democratic socialism, which is still socialist already, but maintain the socialist structure. Unfortunately, this leads to pressure on the Slovakians by the central government. Dubček manages to hold on to power. But social system it says is preserved. So Dubček, though maybe still Snake, is pressured into keeping democratic socialism in Czechoslovakia. Brezhnev hesitated, but it maintains, if you look on the map, socialist reformism, ruling party socialist. So not communist, but not capitalist. And I'm looking at GDR. Sorry, same thing here though. High liberalization though. Because of all the worrying, yeah, that's gonna be a problem. Lieberman's reforms. Support by Kosygin, developed under Khrushchev and taking strong influence on the Hungarian forms, the visions of the expansion of economic independence, blah, blah, blah. This leads to a stronger starting economy, but less tech, weaker economy in the long run, and higher debt, and you start off with a lot of imports from capitalist countries, which phasing those out causes disruption. No, let's focus on automation. The plenary meeting of the Central Committee rejected Kosygin's report, but agreed on the need for reforms, focused on automation, on-mat control systems, special computer centers, technological, more mass participation in the central planned economy, basically. This will still let me, using political power later, if I can open up the Department of Interior, swap to a more decentralized, what's this show? It's under finance. Typical economy, swap to state planning with self-management elements, which is still got a lot of state planning. That's probably good, or state planning with market elements. Yeah. One of the things is you leave things up to markets. Even if it's market socialism, you can still get very antisocial behavior. People do things like pump pollution in the environment because it's in the interest of, say, the workers in a workers' cooperative, but not the general community. Although ideally, central planning should be more decentralized. It shouldn't be on the level always of a national government, but like a town or regional government. So it's close to home, but you want voter participation. People who don't work at a factory should still have more influence over how it's done. And while regulations can serve that role, it's easy enough to dodge regulations. Giving actual power to the population helps. It's especially important things like healthcare, pollution, things that have a lot of what economists, even capitalist economists, call economic externalities. Space race. Continue the peaceful space race. When it grows into armed conflict, walks into the military satellite stuff, and I think SDI might still allow me to access that. So, energy Buron is saved. It doesn't just do one launch and do nothing more. Start with more space tech, get a moon base fairly early if I can survive earlier shocks. Islamic Revolution. I can break relations. I think that'll prevent Iraq from becoming pro-US, but I'm going to do this. I can later still get a pro-Soviet government in Iraq, and this will allow me, and eventually still take more direct control in Iran, get rid of the Islamic socialism, and have an actual more secular socialist government that's not huge power for the theocracy. But this leads to a more socialist government than historic Iran did have, and starts with a pro-Soviet government in Iran, which I suspect helps in the Afghan war, since Iran and Pakistan border Afghanistan, which is part of why, and Iran also borders Iraq, which is part of why historically Iran offered to demilitarize, reduce their nuclear arsenals right after the U.S. invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, and Bush missed the opportunity because he was an imperialist and didn't give a shit, and he wanted an excuse to invade Iran. In fact, the PowerPoint slides were later leaked from a presentation, the project A New American Century, where the Heritage Foundation, who basically gave marching orders to likes of Bush and later created Project 2025 for Trump, very openly talked about, had PowerPoints and everything about how they planned to invade Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran, and North Korea. Probably led to end the world. I think they figured they couldn't do everything, but that was on their wish list. Fortunately, Iraq and Afghanistan did not go well for the US. Invasion of Iraq was completely unjustified. Pointing out that Saddam was a terrible person doesn't justify it, since the US supported all kinds of terrible right-wing dictators. Broad left coalition, Iran, Islamic left takes power. Vladimir Vistovsky. This was good for the party. Stop the persecution of this musician. I wonder what liberalization looks like here now. Still very high. Problematic. I guess lying moderates in Germany rarely leads to very high liberalization in the Warsaw Pact. But, excuse me. That could be a problem with the stability there. What do things look like with relations with France? 66. Oh, I might actually be able to get a free trade agreement. Relations over 80. We'll see. The Polish crisis. Transfer of power to moderates. This includes creation of an ombudsman. And relations are still at 66 with France. Samantha Smith, white recruit. Assassinated by the CIA, probably. 76, I guess Smith helped